Okay, for everybody today, we're going to be looking over the concept checklist and then looking at the yellow review packet. And so we'll kind of have a combination of questions from this concept checklist and from the yellow packet, which is our review packet. And so I'm going to start with a question I had about number 1 on the review packet. It says, write it in set builder notation. Well, just a reminder, this is what set builder notation looks like. If you only have one variable, you just say X. And oh, okay, pausing for a second. So, X where, and now you have to go, well, what do you want X to be? Now, in this case, I'm not going to give you the final answer because, again, that's your job. You're supposed to figure these out. But if you had graphed it and you thought it was like, for instance, between 2 and 5, and then maybe there was another graph down here that was between 4 and 7, it's something like this. If you had something like this and you were looking for where they intersected, you could say, oh, the answers are between 4 and 5. So how would I say that in set builder? If you're going to say a sandwich like this, X is between 4 and 5, listen close, you will always use less than signs. If you ever catch yourself putting in a greater than sign in one of those, you're doing it wrong. You can't use a sandwich like that unless you use less than signs, because that'll force you to have the smaller number here and the bigger number here, which is what you have to do, and then you will have less than signs, and then it'll all be fine. But there are other kinds of problems you can't answer with a sandwich. For instance, let's say that you had an answer that was like this, less than 4, but greater or equal to 5. That in set builder would be like this, X where, and then I can just say the two things. X has to be less than 4, and X has to be greater than or equal to 5, but I do need to put something between them. If I say union, then I'm saying it's all of those things. If I'm saying intersect, I'm saying where they overlap. These don't even overlap. So you are right, it has to be a union to do that kind of an answer. So there's a reminder of how set builder works. These both would be okay set builder type answers. If you're going to use a sandwich, it has to be something that goes between two numbers, and you have to use less thans. All right, that's a good topic to talk about. Are there any other questions you have on 1 through 12? These are ones we discussed. Like I gave you some tips about how to do 1 through 12, but if there's any more, like, can you explain more about number 10 or whatever, I will. Okay, there's also more time for that at the end. I'm going to have a healthy review, like work time at the end. All right, so now I'm going to go to number... Did I do number 13 in your class?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So the keys there was, on number 13, was that you'd want to factor the bottom. And remember that things that are under square roots, you set greater or equal to 0. That's for any domain question. I know that one didn't have a square root, but I know what the test has, and I know you have to know this. So anything under a root, you set greater or equal to 0. Anything on the bottom, like x plus 7 and x minus 4, you set this and this not equal to 0. X plus 7 not equal to 0. X minus 4 not equal to 0. And that's a reminder. I'd put all of those things then, after they're solved, onto a number line to do an implied domain question. Okay, on to number 14. Everybody please look at number 14. That's got this thing called the difference quotient. You'll understand more about what it's for. We told you just that it was a way of finding slope even when you've got a curved function. Like if I gave you this, what's the slope of that? Well, it's got a squared in it. How am I supposed to know the slope of that? The slope is not just 3. Well, the slope then depends on x and h, which is like how far apart the points are. So basically, let's say you had something like this, and they wanted to know the slope. Well, you got to tell me, where do you want to start? Like, what's x? Like, say you start there. And how far do you want to move from there? And this is finding the slope through, depending on what x is and how far over h is. All right, so that's what this does. But then how do you do them? You stick x plus h into your function. So if I have a function, which they'll give you a function, like, for instance, this, I have to put x plus h in to both of these spots, and it's all about being really careful with the algebra. I called these the careful problem. And then you got to subtract f of x, so I'm going to go minus f of x, which is the same red equation, but I'm going to put it in parentheses. Do you guys remember that? A ton of people forget these parentheses right here. I'll do them 3 times in different colors because you're subtracting f of x, and if you don't put a parenthesis, you'll forget to distribute the negative to both parts. And then do you remember the deal where when you divide by h at the end, a lot of stuff cancels? If stuff doesn't cancel, then it's not going to work. Okay. All right, so let's move on. Number 15. On number 15, their first job is to find the inverse. Do you guys know that this means inverse? Okay, inverse is where you switch x and y around, and then you solve for y. But then they want the domain and range of the new function. A lot of people just solve, and they've switched x and y, you know, they switch these around, and they get the answer, and then they try to find the domain and range of it. That's wrong. You got to find the domain and range of the original, and then flip-flop them. So I'm going to give you one like that. This is a part where, I know this is like the third thing I've asked you to have open, but either get out a blank Notability doc or add a page to the document that you're in right now on your iPad. And I want to just remind you, because this is so important. I actually had to have this on a test to get nationally board certified to be able to prove that I know math. I had to prove that I knew how to do an inverse. Okay, so this is something that comes up on the ACT, comes up on your final, and it even came up on my big test. So for being to be board certified. All right, so I made it. Yes, it's complicated, but I did it. All right, so let's see, y equals x squared plus 8. Let's find the inverse of that. In case you forgot, you're going to end up with one of those situations where you're going to have to decide, is this the kind where I have 2 answers? Like, is there an absolute value thing? Pausing. Okay, so we got it factored. We got our 2 answers. So that was boring, Mr. Server. That's too easy. Okay, so then what if I make this greater or equal to instead? Well, now the answer isn't just those 2 things. It involves those 2 things. But I've tried to teach you that when you see this, think about the tip of a number line. Because your answer is a range of numbers on a number line. So put the answers on a number line. Okay, fine, server. Here's -9, here's 1. They're on a number line now. You happy? Well, kind of. Owen, should I fill in those spots or not? Since it's or equal to, yes, you fill them in. Now, if you wanted to, you could check and see. You could take the 1 and stick it in and see if it works. If I put in the 1 here and I put in the 1 there, you'd get an answer, and it would be 0. And if it's equal to 0, that's why this is the key. If it's equal to 0 and it's called a 0, then yay, it's going to work. Okay, now how about where will it work? Now, I'll just give this example. I doubt that the kid I call on in this hour is going to pick the wrong area, but last hour, one of my top students shaded the wrong area. Do you remember me telling you, this is one of the most common mistakes, is now to shade the wrong place. Okay. I'm not going to divulge that. My point is that this is a hard thing, or an easy thing to mess up, okay? So how do you decide? You pick a number that's between those 2, like 0, and you put it in. See, he tried to just do it in his head. And you don't want to do that. You want to carefully, and I would double check it, and I'll show you how. Put a 0 in here, and as soon as I said to put in the 0, he's like, oh, well, and then in his class, actually this is reversed, so it doesn't matter. He realized he was wrong in what he had said. So you tell me, does 0 work or not? Do you agree that that drops out this and it drops out that, so then it's -9 is greater than 0?
That's not true.
Doesn't feel like that worked, does it? Okay, so that did not work, and so then it must be on the outsides. Now, how would I double check? Well, I would also check and make sure that something like 2 does work. You know what I mean? Something bigger than 1. So I'm going to put in 2, and I'm going to put it in this way, putting a 2 here and a 2 here. That makes 11 times 1 is 11. Is 11 greater than or equal to 0? Yes, it is. And then the third way I would check that I was right is I'd sketch it. If it's a parabola, do you get it looks like this? Unless there's a negative in front, it's a parabola, looks like this. Focus. Last one. You can do this. So that graph here, I just graphed, did I want it to be above 0 or below 0?
We can do that too.
If we look at this, I wanted greater than 0. So do you get where the parabola is greater than 0? Out here and out here, and therefore it's from -infinity to -9, bracket, and from 1 to infinity, and I put a union between those two. And if they wanted it in interval notation, it would be like I just did. If they wanted it on a number line, I already had it. And if they wanted it in set builder, I'd have to say x where, and then I'd have to say x is less than or equal to 9, and x is greater than or equal to 1. So set builder really isn't that bad except for one thing. Do I want a union or an intersect? These don't even intersect, so that would be a bad answer, unless you want no solution to be the answer. Okay? It's union. Okay, there you go. All right, so there's a good review of a bunch of things. I want to acknowledge the fact that I can't cover everything. We've had 90 days of math, and would you agree that I've pretty much been teaching you almost all hour for 90 hours? I can't just go over everything that I did unless I can talk at 90 times my normal rate. Well, then I could do it in 1 hour, unless you could process that. You can understand language at 3 times the rate at which it is normally spoken. Like, you probably heard that, right? And understood it. So you can, but how long you can pay attention to somebody at 3 times the rate they normally speak. And that's only 3 times. That's not 90 times. All right. But I do want to give you a chance to ask me questions off of 2 areas here. Number 1 is this one, the Chapter 1 concept list. And one of my wonderful colleagues, Katie Roach, is one of the teachers who teaches this class, and she made this up, so props to her. We all got together to make the questions for the quiz, the questions for the review, and the questions for like a retake of the, a second version of the final, my bad. So we got all the questions together, and her job was to organize those questions and put them into the final, and she did that, and she also made this, which I didn't make. So she did all this extra work, but the one thing I'm not going to promise you, she has boxed in the ones she felt were the most important. I am not saying that you will not have to do distance and midpoint. They're right off the top 20. I would say you have to know those, okay? So don't assume that just because there's a red box around it means that I promise there's no probability on the test. I am not promising that. But this is a great list of things that we have covered in Chapter 1 that could be on the final. And I'm just going to say that the red boxed ones are ones that are more important than the others. Yes?
2 things. Does the final include the sequences and series stuff we just did?
That's an excellent question. I'm going to wait till we get to Chapter 9, which is quite a ways from now. So I'd like to focus our questions on Chapter 1 right now. Anything on the board that you want to ask about, or Chapter 2?
Okay, and then also can we do a problem
Something that's not Chapter 1 or 2?
set notation?
Okay, good. If it's in
using
Chapter
X
1.
with X and Y?
All right, so set notation. And let's do a practice problem like that. Here is a practice problem like that. X is greater than or equal to 4. Intersect y is less than or equal to 2. Do you remember those and that you can graph them? Let's do a practice like that. So everybody take a quick sketch and take a moment to figure out where the heck is x equal to 4. That's where I'd start. One of these, oh wait, I'm gonna change one thing. I'm gonna make this just a less than. So that way one of your lines is dotted and one of those lines is solid. We probably only have 2 more minutes of me helping you, so try to focus, and then it'll just be worked out, okay? Stay with me. Try this problem. I know that this is something that would be, at least pieces of it, things we're gonna test you on. All right, where is x4? 1, 2, 3, 4. And then would the line x equals 4 go across that like this way? No, because that wouldn't make any sense. That would be x is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. X is just 4. So then the line would have to go this way. Now, should it be solid or should it be dotted? Solid, because it says or equal to. And then it says bigger. So you shade to the right. How many of you had that part right? Good. Now, how about y and 2? Well, obviously, that must go the other way. Here's where y is 2. And then it must go this way. What did I do wrong already?
It has to be a dotted line.
Dotted line, because it says less than, and it means it can't be equal to it. And so this should be a dotted line. Okay, and then where should I shade? Below or above? Below. And now I have a little intersect sign, which means it's not everything that got shaded. It's just the part where they overlapped. So there is an example of the type of question you asked.
Have you read it inside?
This is inset notation.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Okay.
Wait, wouldn't you have to do like, instead of just X on the left side, would you have to
Ooh, you're right. This is x comma y. Sorry about that. I did have both, but I should have said x comma y right there. All right. Any other topics off of chapter 1 that you want to ask me?
you leave them up there for a second?
Yep. You can always ask me individual questions. Sure. Probability was just as simple as marbles in a bag. So we would say like, and it does say single event. So the much more complicated ones are, what's the probability I pick a red one and then I pick a blue one? But if I just have a single event, it would be like, I reach into the bag and I get a blue one. Well, there's 3 of this and 3 of that, so it's what you want over what's possible. So the probability of blue one would be like 3 out of 6. And if there was, let's say there's 4 blue ones in there, and I say, what's the probability of black one? Well, that would be 3 out of 7. Would be the probability of a black one. All right, let's move on to chapter 2 checklist. Is there any questions from this? Notice, remember, Katie's trying to direct the kids' attention to the red circled areas. I'm not promising there's nothing from other areas. This is very similar to what we just did, because Miss S over there asked the question. Try to keep full names off of the videos. So that's kind of a repeat of what you asked a second ago. But how about the ones that are boxed in red? Any questions? You remember how to find, if they say y equals 0, you're finding the what intercept? If y equals 0, you're finding the x-intercept. And if x equals 0, you're finding the y-intercept. Domain arranged from a graph, we talked about that. Implied domains, that's the kind where you have this, and you have to put both things on one number line. You say it can't be 3, and it has to be bigger than or equal to -7, that kind of thing. Question? You can ask me individually if you want to. All right, so then I am going to say the rest of the time is yours to study. One, just as I set ground rules, you can't come up and ask me about anything except chapters 1 and 2, or anything on the yellow packet that is not the last page. Don't ask me about the last page, because that's another day. We're going to cover the last page on like Monday. So you can ask me about anything in the yellow packet except to the last page, and you could ask me about chapters 1 and 2 checklist. Okay, if you come up here and ask me about chapter 3, I'm going to say, wait, we'll cover that on a different day. All right. And now you also, during this time, can ask me about your quiz. So if you have something wrong on the quiz, if you're going to say, but I just typed the wrong thing, and yeah, that's why you got it wrong. Okay, but if you have a right answer typed in, and I just didn't have it in my like I didn't realize, oh, that's also a right answer, I will give you credit if you have a right answer typed in. But if all you're going to tell me is, sad story, I typed my answer wrong, sorry, you're going to get it wrong. Okay, and that's all I have for today. End of the video for today.